So we go from ice to fire, and Robert Frost was right, the end of the world may involve them both. So why is an artist who created Waterfire concerned about sea level rise and climate change? I created Waterfire 29 years ago, which is hard to believe, and its intention was to celebrate the community that's here in Providence, to make the city a destination, and to build its fortune through opportunities for us to come together as a people and build an optimistic future. And in those 29 years, we've had an intimate relationship with the tides and the moon and the sunset and, of course, the water. And it's very clear that the water is very close to the city. And in fact, the current monthly high tides are about 3 feet away from the lowest streets in the city, which happens to be, or one of the low spots is right in front of City Hall. And since we have to interact with many of those systems, we spend a fair amount of time thinking about that. And it really goes back to the history of Providence. But this is not people are worried to talk about climate change because it's often seen as a negative story, and it is complicated, but there are many opportunities within it. And in fact, Providence has a couple particular things about where we are in the world that makes it a very interesting and positive story for Providence. It's one of the few places where I think we can make a case for strategic protection. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is. So let's go back. This is our city. This is a while ago. This is when the rivers had just been moved, but most of the construction had not yet happened. But I show it to you just to remind you that that's sea level right there. As it goes up, it intersects throughout the community. Also, the city of Providence has many preserved architectural buildings. And one of the best environmental interactions we can have is to take over existing buildings and use them to create dense, urban, walkable space where we can get away from our dependence on automobiles and things like that. So that the inherent resources we have at hand can quite persuasively make Providence a pretty amazing city. But rising sea levels, you can see Providence was founded on this cove, which is sea level right there. But sea level is going to affect coastal cities all across the world. And how does Providence fare with respect to that? And what might we be able to do now or think about doing that will help assure our prosperous and equitable future? So when you look at old paintings of Providence, you'll notice something right away, that almost all the neighborhoods are actually on very high ground. South Providence is about 70 feet above sea level. This painting in the middle on Benefit Street is 54 feet above sea level. The top painting from the top of College Hill is 196 feet above sea level, and it's looking across the bay to Federal Hill, which is 82 feet above sea level. All of those neighborhoods are well above any predicted sea level rise. Downtown is another story. This is a drawing of downtown because it shows buildings that weren't there at the same time. But this is a sketch, just to give you an example. Now, the red date there is City Hall and Kennedy Plaza in front of it. And over to your far right, where it says 1898, that's the Union Station train station where the Rhode Island Foundation is now. So the skating rink is in front of it. The building that looks totally unfamiliar is the big train station that's in the middle of what's now Kennedy Plaza. And I put this up just to give people a sense of how this changed. So when Providence was founded, this was all water, and the green strip through City Hall was extremely marshy. You couldn't walk through there at all. So we started to pull down those hills and fill in that cove. And you begin to see that we filled in the marsh and this area of water in order to build that train station in 1848. And we left a big cove behind it. And you may have seen pictures of that cove. It was called the Great Cove, and it was planted with trees all the way around, and it was a park. And the railroads filled in order to connect, and that's what you can see. And then in 1896, we filled in most of that cove, except for the river, again for the railroads. So this big, heavy industrial use wiped out everything that had been there, but mostly what had there had been water. And then we moved on to automobiles, and then it was one of the biggest parking lots in the East Coast. This picture is not that long ago, early 60s, I think. But it's all close to sea level. And in fact, this is what the shore, which now where the pedestrian bridge is, this is what it looked like in the late 60s. Older businesses, a falling apart seafront, many of them abandoned. And now, with the help of quite a few people, we've managed to uncover these rivers and in fact move the rivers. There's the old location and the new location. They moved the river so you could continuously walk along the river. And this was finished, Water Place, the circle up there, was finished in about 1993. And I created Waterfire in December of 94 because although the park was winning awards, people weren't coming. So I wanted to figure out how we could make the city bright and see a bright future for it. But now we need to look at sea level rise. So here's the park we have, but there's the sea. Now, Providence has had a long history of its interaction with the sea. We've had 6 major hurricanes. The painting is from 1815, and the 6 of them are from 1635 to 1954. And we managed to protect the city after the 38 and 54 hurricane by building the hurricane barrier. But if you look at the older buildings, here is a building built in 1774, and you'll notice where the red line is, that's the height of the hurricane barrier. And in fact, they didn't expect to occupy the space below that height. They knew hurricanes were going to come, and those basements were for wet storage. In 74, they decided to put a commercial thing in there, but they still knew it was going to go. And in 1828, when this building was built, the hurricane barrier is the lower red line, but the 1815 hurricane had come in just to remind people that the sea was there, and he built that first floor 3 feet higher. There's an example of the damage that happened in 1938. And another picture from 1938. So we built the first hurricane protection barrier in the United States, I think the first one in the world, actually. And it took advantage of a really interesting morphological feature of where we are in Providence. All the residential neighborhoods, that's South Providence on the right, are well above sea level. This is the east side and the steep College Hill and then Smith Hill. And there's a fairly narrow section between the two. So because we're protected by these these dikes of solid stone, with a narrow opening to the sea, the hurricane barrier was feasible. And here's a drawing of how it works. And it goes up to a height of about 27 feet. And it closes the 3 walls, and then pumps need to pump the water that the storm would bring into downtown out. So it's a complicated thing to do. And it does give us some protection for a period of time, which means we don't need to immediately deal with this, but we ought to be starting to think now strategically about what interactions we may have to do, because I think Providence could be one of the few historic coastal cities in the United States that could still be here in 200 years. So the impacts of sea level rise and climate change are enormous. They impact us with climate warming in the inner city where there aren't trees. They impact sea level rise will cause flooding, but they also, because the sea's getting warmer, the storms are getting bigger and stronger and winds are getting more powerful. And all of those things cause things like this. So right now, on high tides, this park, which was designed to be above high tide, will flood. That can be controlled. And we control it right now for Waterfire, where we pay the Army Corps of Engineers to close the hurricane barrier just to trim off the highest water of the high tide for that peak. It might be a 2-hour period, and then allow the flow to go. That will protect the city for the next 2 feet of sea level rise. 2 feet's a long time, 40 to 70 years. The reason why the models are so complicated is they also have to model our behavior as a community, whether we switch to electric cars and succeed in all the work we know needs to be done, but it's hard to do. That's why the models, so I'd rather go with feet. We know the hurricane barrier can protect for 2 feet, and probably up to 4, maybe 5. There it is. Here are those heights, and the purple line here is the 50-foot contour, and there's a similar one on the left side around South Providence and Federal Hill and Smith Hill. However, this is the height we would need to make the barrier, because it's no longer effective for hurricanes if the sea level is higher, because it was made for the height of what's called a 500-year storm. And you can see that we only need to go about 4 feet higher to 2050 and maybe 9 feet higher in the Bay Area for 2100. And 2200 is probably way too far away to plan for, but we actually could do that too. We're one of the very few cities that can do this. So here's a map of Providence. And then let's look at, so all of that green is higher than 30 feet, 35 feet. That's a long way from now. It's protected by solid granite. Let's look at a neighboring city. Same scale. Here's Boston. Here's how much is above 35 feet. So let's pull back. Here's Boston, 35 feet. There's no solution here eventually. Short term, there's some solutions. But Providence actually could plan for a very long future. And we ought to think about that and realize that of all the cities with preserved historic architecture of an old port, we're the only city that could do that. It could be an incredible opportunity for us. It's not an easy solution, but it's doable. So each of us need to reduce our carbon footprint. We need to get off of carbon in general. We need to plant trees. We need to do urban agriculture. Many of these things we've talked about here. And there's a few things the city must do. We need to continue to plan for rainwater and infrastructure. And we also need to remember that at some point we're going to need 2 hurricane barriers, the first one and the new higher one we're building. So this should be kept as a public park so that eventually when we need to, we can build that, because it'll take 5 to 8 years to build that, and we don't want to be without protection in the meantime. But here's another thing we could do, which I really strongly urge us to get involved with. This is the tree canopy in Providence. And this is the air temperature and urban heat island. And you can see that the neighborhoods that are most affected by not having enough trees are also the most unjustly affected and underserved members of the community. We can fix this. We should fix this. Here is College Street. It's on the east side, had lots of trees. But it's interesting. Let's look at South Providence and the Jewelry District in a working class neighborhood. 1889, still lots of trees. And in fact, we had trees, Federal Hill, Olneyville, Chalkstone, Prairie Ave, Thurber. There were trees all over Providence. We've lost many of them, and we've lost them for a lot of reasons. We used to have a book about the importance of trees given to school kids every May. It's 50 pages long about the importance of trees. We're losing trees for lots of reasons. We lose them for people wanting parking. We lose them because we often plant street trees where cars run into them. But we often lose them for reasons like this. And this is a matter simply of education. Here are 4 oak trees that someone's taken a machete and girdled them to kill them. And when I asked, he said, well, I wanted more parking. And I said, it's on a fence line. It doesn't increase your parking at all. So all of us need to make our part to transition to make Providence's future what it can be. It's an amazing city. We have so many strong communities we're investing in, from schools, from college, from education, from urban farming, from transformative recognition of our history, of the industrialization that was here, of the new industries that we can do. All of these transitions will build jobs and build us to be a stronger community. And in fact, we could probably be the only extant historical coastal city in the entire United States. And that is a sad story, but it's also an amazing story about the potential that Providence has. So thank you very much for thinking about that, and let's continue.